Welcome back or welcome to the Train Right podcast. We've got a dynamic duo on today's episode, Sara Bird and Rob Pellow from Viome. Sara, could you tell our audience a bit more about what you do at Viome and how you got started working with them?
Sure, Adam, and thanks for having us. So at Biome, I am the Director of Laboratory Operations and Product Development. So my role is really to help Biome scale and grow the business. And I'm mostly focused on helping our laboratory team, which is where you actually send in those precious poop samples, helping us try to be as efficient and the highest quality as possible, and also look forward to how we can scale the laboratory operations as our business expands. And a little bit more about me. So, my background is in microbiology. I got my degree in microbiology from UC Davis and then went on to do a PhD in microbiology and immunology at Stanford University. And my scientific background is actually in the study of RNA viruses. So I worked on host pathogen interactions on poliovirus when I was at
Oh,
Stanford.
wow. Wow, interesting.
But I've always been really interested in the microbiome, partly because I have been a lifelong athlete myself. And as I've learned how important the microbiome is for overall health and wellness, like we'll be discussing today, I've always been really keenly interested in that field. And so for the past few years, I have worked in the microbiome industry, transitioned, like I said, a bit from the scientific and R&D side into the operations and business side of things. But I really pull from, my own personal interest in kind of optimizing my own health and wellness and how I can kind of bring that perspective as both an athlete and a scientist to my role at Viome. And it's really great working at a company with so many like-minded individuals. And, Rob and I will both tell you how much we really enjoy doing kind of a bit of our own biohacking and optimizing our own health and wellness. And so it's really fun working at a company that thinks about how to turn those into meaningful products for our customers.
Absolutely. And I understand that you know how to race a bike too, right?
Oh yeah, so the past, I would say, I think it's been about 10 years or so. Got into cycling kind of through my dad and my uncle, who've been lifelong cyclists. I am actually a Cat 1 cyclist myself, though I would consider myself a little bit more on the weekend warrior side these days. But especially during this time when there's not a lot of racing going on, it's been fun to ride with my friends on weekends and go for those Strava KOMs and QMs. Haven't quite gotten into the Everstein myself, but there's still time in the summer, so we'll see.
Well, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. Thank you for that, Sara. Rob, how did you get involved with Viome and what is your key role there?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I do not have nearly the technical background that Sara does, but what I do at Viome is I am the director of strategic partnerships and performance. And so what that means is I work with our professional athletes, including our Olympians and Grand Slam winners, and help them understand their Viome results, and then ultimately implement those food recommendations and supplements to optimize their performance.
Very cool. And your athletic background, I mean, you slap some pucks around on the ice, right?
Yeah, so I am not an endurance athlete. Aside from one pseudo marathon, I think I've never run more than about 2 miles in a given stint. But yes, I played ice hockey at the University of Delaware. Was fortunate enough to win a national championship there in 2012. Uh,
Nice.
yeah, it was a good time.
Very cool. Well, thank you both for being on the show. Welcome. And Rob, it's been fun just kind of dialoguing with you. I was actually introduced to you through one of my athletes, a CTS athlete named Jeff Mahan, the great connector of business peoples. And since then, this experience of the Biome journey has been really interesting. And we'll get into that here later on in the show a bit. But it's been super fascinating. So I want to bring you both on on the show and talk about how this could apply to our listeners and help athletes improve their performance. So uh, before we get into the science, Rob, I'll turn to you first. I gave a bit of an overview of what Biome does in the intro, but for our listeners, could you summarize a bit more about what Biome does and kind of your guys' mission at the company?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a great place to start. So at a high level, Viome is a biotech company that our mission is to make illness optional. And, Adam, as you and I were chatting earlier, that's kind of a kooky concept to say make illness optional. Optional implies that there's some sort of choice involved. But really, what we're doing at Viome is we're helping people understand what their body uniquely needs to be healthy. And the way that we're doing that is through understanding the function of your human cells, so think like your immune cells, your mitochondria, and your microbiome. And when you understand how all of those cells are actually functioning, and are they doing what they should be doing, or are they malfunctioning in some way, then you can create really precise nutritional and supplement recommendations to ultimately prevent and reverse chronic disease. And so we've actually had Mayo Clinic, United Health Group, GSK, who's the world leader in vaccine creation, and a number of others partner with us to use this technology to move humanity forward. But I'll add that's a very kind of big concept. I think more what we're going to chat about today is why we work with so many athletes today, certainly more than we worked with 2 years ago. And the reality there is when you understand how your body is functioning at a cellular level and you can improve that function by understanding what foods to eat more of or what healthy foods to avoid, you can really improve performance. And that's something that a lot of athletes seem to be very interested in.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And yes, to make illness optional, that is a very bold statement. But I love it. I mean, come out swinging with it. And I think as it applies to, our listeners who are just addicted to that performance and to overall health and wellness, I mean, it's gonna hit the sweet spot. So I understand that there's two kind of services that you provide at Biome. It's the health intelligence service and the gut intelligence. Could you just go high level what those are and what that means?
Yeah, so the health intelligence is the Mac Daddy at home test, really creates a complete digital snapshot of your overall health. And what that's doing is it is an at home blood test and an at home stool test. And as you and I chatted about, don't mix those two together. Um,
No, don't mix those two together.
but when we get those back at the lab, what we're able to see is the microbiome test will show you how is your microbiome functioning. You have trillions of microbes that are breaking down your food, producing hormones and neurotransmitters and all of these types of metabolites to run your body. So how is that system functioning? And then we're also looking again at the blood, which is what is your mitochondria doing? The powerhouse of the cell, generating all of your energy. And how are your immune cells and other human cells functioning? Are they doing what they should be doing, or are there signs of inflammation and bad behavior? And from all that, then we can make really precise nutritional guidelines and supplement recommendations for people. So that's the health intelligence. The other product you mentioned, the gut intelligence, is simply the microbiome test on its own.
Got it. Got it. So how does Viome analyze people's microbiomes? I mean, how does that work?
I'm actually going to turn that one over to Sara, the lab master. How does that at a high level go down?
Yeah, so we're really fortunate at Viome to have tapped in and licensed some really amazing technology from Los Alamos National Laboratory. So
Which is the
Viome,
U.S. government, for those who are unfamiliar. Basically, we took this formerly defense technology and commercialized it, which is why it exists nowhere else.
Love it.
exactly.
Love it.
Exactly. So, at a really high level, we do things at Viome slightly differently than some other companies in the microbiome space have done this. So, we look at the actual activity of the microbes that are in your gut and also look at the activity of the human genes that are being expressed. So, we're not just looking at who's there, we're really asking the question, what are they doing? And we use a technology called sequencing to do that. And then there's a lot of hand wavy parts after that with our really fantastic AI and data science team. But basically, after we do the sequencing, we run what's called a bioinformatic pipeline that can then pull out the specific sequences that we're looking for. And it then goes into an AI engine that generates and all the scores that you end up seeing in your app, pulling from a lot of translational science and systems biology. And the other key component to this is we collect really valuable metadata. And so that's the data about the data. And
Mm-hmm.
you get that when you answer those questionnaires. So we are trying to learn things about, are you a heavy drinker? Are you a smoker? Are you on a vegetarian diet? Do you exercise? And so that data, that metadata coupled with the actual results of the sequences in your sample, gives us the scores that you see in your app.
Got it. So you're getting the actual samples from the humans as well as the information from a questionnaire in order to get that done. And there's hand wavy, the greatest adjective in the world, on the front side of things. But there's a lot of data going into this analyzation process.
Exactly. And we really are a data company. We have over
Mm-hmm.
125,000 customers at this point. So the cool thing is, the more samples that we collect, the better our engine gets, and the stronger the data gets, the more we learn
Yeah.
about the different relationships between the microbiome and human health and disease. So it's a really powerful tool, and it only gets better over time.
Cool.
And to
Well,
clarify one other thing too about the hand waviness. So there,
please, Rob.
yes. So I'm not a scientist, but I will fill in some technical terms here on hand waviness. Uh, the AI system, which to Sarah's point, we are almost a data company, was created by the head engineer who created the IBM Watson project.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so our AI is this unbelievable engine that all of this data gets put through.
Got it. Got it. So definitely more than hand waviness, but still a good
Definitely.
adjective. Still a good adjective. Well, let's actually explore some of these terms, and I'm going to learn here along with our audience. But Sara, I'll turn to you since you're the smartest person in the room. Could you describe to us what a microbiome is, or the microbiome, and why humans need to know about it?
Yeah, sure. So we've all kind of heard about the microbiome at this point. It's made lots of splashes in the news. But at a high level, so the microbiota is the collection of all these microbes, microorganisms that live in and on our body. So yes, you have microbes not just in your gut, mostly the large intestine. You have microbes in your nose, in your mouth, on your skin. And yes, men and women, men have microbiomes in the semen. Women, you have microbes in your vagina. Microbes are everywhere, right? We've evolved with them. And when we talk about the actual microbiome, that's the collection of the genetic material of those microbes. And so one thing that's really fascinating is, so humans have something like 20 or 21,000 genes, which sounds like a lot. The microbes in the collective microbiome is over 100 times that many genes. And so when we think
Wow.
about, going back to our biology class, and we remember that genes, which are the DNA makes RNA, which then makes a protein, and the protein goes and does some sort of function. If you think about these microbes that contain 100 times the number of genes, that can make 100 times the number of functional products that have some sort of effect on our bodies, it's kind of astronomical. And on top of that, we're just scratching the surface about what we're really learning about the microbiome. So we do know quite a bit, like way more than we knew even a year ago, but there's still a lot to uncover there. And as you can imagine, this means that the microbiome influences literally everything about us. So from weight gain, weight loss, to our mood, our immunity, sleep, food cravings. So yeah, absolutely, it's a really important area for all of us to at least try to understand a bit more about.
Yeah, no, I mean my mind is being blown as we sit here virtually and distanced. So let me understand this a little bit better. So we got a bunch of microbes and things helping us, but they could also hurt us, right?
Mhm.
As we live. And so there must be a balance, and there must be a
Yeah.
homeostasis. How do you seek homeostasis, and when you know, like when you're out of balance, and what does that mean?
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head with homeostasis is definitely the right word to use there. So, there's a lot of stressors in our lives. Poor sleep. You go on vacation and you start eating a lot of rich foods, and you just feel really crappy after that. Your stomach's in a lot of pain. You feel lethargic. Let's say you get sick. Maybe you're an athlete and you're training a lot all of a sudden, and you're feeling run down. There's a lot of stressors in our lives. And those stressors affect a lot of our function. They are also going to affect the microbes that are in our gut as well. They're going to respond to those stressors. And so if those stressors are built up and there over time, it's going to have an effect on the microbes that are responding, right? So as an example, when those microbes see the different foods that come into your digestive tract, they're going to respond to that food, help you digest that food, and create different types of metabolites in response to that digestion. But as the balance starts to shift, it might favor microbes that aren't as beneficial to your system. And so if you're not able to bring it back to balance and the balance starts shifts in one direction or another, you can start leading down some paths that will ultimately lead to increased inflammation. That's really what we start to think about when we see things getting a bit out of balance.
Okay, so if I have a bad day of racing, I could just blame it on a microbiome that's out of balance. That's another good excuse. Is that right?
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, absolutely. There's
I
so many
mean,
factors that go into it, right? Depending on how your microbiome was going as you went into that race. No, absolutely.
I've never heard it from one of my athletes, but it might start to
I wish
come
I
up
knew
now.
about that when I was racing. I might have pulled that excuse
For
out.
sure, right? For sure. I'll see it in like one of my athletes' comments on Training Peaks. I'm pretty sure. But so you said a key word there, inflammation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's as the nerdy techie people call it, let's double click on inflammation here for a minute. Is
Right.
all inflammation bad?
Oh, yeah, great question. So, inflammation is definitely not all bad. It's a perfectly normal part of our immune system.
Okay.
And so, if we didn't have any inflammation, we would probably not be here for very long. We'd be in pretty big trouble. But we can break this down a bit further. So, you can think of inflammation in two kind of broad categories that we're all inherently familiar with, but just to kind of touch on them. So let's start with acute inflammation. And I'll give a couple examples of acute inflammation. So back in 2014, I raced the North Star Grand Prix, formerly the Nature Valley stage race. And there's quite a few, if you've done that race, there's quite a few criteriums during that race. And every single one had at least 4 or 5 crashes. And I remember on stage, it was 3 or 4, I endoed and landed hard on my chest and got a ton of road rash and, not
Inflammation
fun.
City.
Exactly. Not fun.
Yeah.
But thankfully I was able to continue and finish the race out. But of course, what inevitably starts happening is my body starts to try to heal that road rash. You get scabbing, you get, redness and swelling and warmth to the side of the wound. That's an active inflammation, but your body's healing that. It's what's supposed to happen when you have any kind of injury. Another example of acute inflammation could be when, Coach Adam gives you a 5x5 minute VO2 max set that you're just really not excited about. It's going to be really hard, but you get through it. And then, the next day your legs are kind of sore. So you had likely some micro tears in your muscles that now your body is going to go and have some inflammation at that site to help repair your muscles. And that's another example of acute inflammation. Then of course there's the, hey, I caught a cold. I'm kind of out for a week. I've got, sore throat, maybe a fever and some aches. But if I take it easy, no big deal. My inflammatory system, my immune response is going to kick in and help me recover, and I'll be back to baseline again. So that's some examples of acute inflammation. Where things start to get a little ugly is when you start to get into the chronic inflammation, which can be caused by a variety of things, but we have been sort of talking about some of those stressors. So sticking with the cyclist example, I think we all know, I can relate to this when you're a new cyclist and let's say you're pretty athletic. So you move up really fast. You are like Cat 5 to Cat 2 in one summer. because you've just figured it out. You're winning your races. And then maybe you decide, okay, I'm gonna get serious. I'm gonna get a coach. And you think, well, I just have to train more and more and more. It's just I need to see volume. But you don't have the years of base in there to really
Yep.
help you.
Yep.
Your coach might give you that recovery day, and then he sees your file, and you were just at zone 3 the entire time because you didn't really feel like you needed to ride recovery. And then maybe you weren't sleeping well, and then maybe you got a cold on top of that, and it's just you know every time you're going out and doing that training, it's like a series of acute inflammations, but you're not allowing yourself to recover. And now you're heading to a point where you might be overtrained, and that could lead to the symptoms of chronic inflammation. And so, what we're really talking about there is you're not allowing your body to get back to that baseline at the cellular level. Your body is expressing and making a lot of proteins and inflammatory markers that are keeping systems on when they should really be off. And you're really not going to feel great, and you're not going to be able to perform at the levels that you want to be.
Yeah, those are really good examples. All perfect scenarios that I've seen, firsthand before. And so that, yeah, thank you for those examples. That's really good. If I could ask a little bit more about chronic disease too,
Yeah.
say the athlete is following Coach Adams' program perfectly, which is a perfect program, right?
Yeah, basically.
But they are following, everything's going well, but there's still like some weird, like, coach, I got this weird lingering thing going on. I just feel kind of sluggish and bad, like, and I'm not seeing anything necessarily in the data. I mean, we're following textbook training parameters. Like, could there be a chronic inflammation thing going on just from other aspects of life, not the training side?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Right.
we'll talk today about the food side. Definitely the things that you eat, your microbes are going to be metabolizing those into byproducts that might not work best for you.
Hmm.
There's obviously other stressors, like if you're just not sleeping, and it could also be an indication of some sort of, viral or other type of infection as well.
Hmm.
Or maybe there's, of course, genetic predispositions to some sort of diseases, but, it definitely, if you haven't looked at your diet yet, that would be a good place to start.
All right, Sarah. So you talked about metabolism,
Yep.
and you said the word metabolites. Can you
Yep.
talk us through like what happens in human physiology during
Yeah.
metabolism? What a metabolite is?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, okay, so we all know, you eat your lunch and the food goes into your stomach, and your digestive enzymes start to break down that food, and then it goes into your small intestine, and there's a lot of surface area in your small intestine because it's designed to really rapidly absorb those key vitamins and minerals and nutrients in the food that give you energy and allow all your cells to perform the basic functions that they need for you to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't digest everything. And thankfully have a bunch of helpers in there that are ready to break down other, carbs, fats, and proteins that you're not able to digest. And so let's just take an example. So let's say I'm eating an apple. So that apple contains sugar. Sugar is made of glucose and fructose. So the fructose, once it gets into my system, it'll go off and be further broken down in the liver. But that glucose, we all know about glucose as athletes. It's right with energy. It gets absorbed by our cells and goes down a pathway to help make ATP and energy for your system. And that's a metabolite. So a metabolite is really any product of a metabolic pathway. But that apple also has fiber, and microbes love fiber. They take that fiber and they break it down into their own metabolites. And so, one of the most well known metabolites of the microbiome are what's called short chain fatty acids. And short chain fatty acids are really important in our own energy and metabolism and digestion. And as I mentioned, so good sources of these short chain fatty acids are foods that are high in fiber, like fruit and vegetables and legumes. And some well-known short chain fatty acids, or one of the most well-known is one called butyrate. So just to give that as an example, butyrate provides energy directly for your cells in your gut. It helps continue down that glycolysis, that glucose metabolism pathway that your cells need. And so it provides support in that area. But butyrate also has some anti-inflammatory effects. It can lead to the production of antioxidants, which neutralize free radicals, and that's really important for athletes that are constantly under a lot of training stress and training load. And butyrate is also linked to, if you have low butyrate levels, it's linked to an increased risk of colorectal cancer. So you definitely want, good levels of butyrate if possible. But even having said all that, none of that really matters if you're not in the right context. So everything Rob and I are talking about today, it really is important that this is all very personalized. So just because, you have microbes that are producing lots of butyrate, you might also have microbes that prevent them from producing butyrate. So your context is really important because everyone's gut composition is so different. So it is very hard to make a lot of generalizations about what these microbes are doing, but just know that you have microbes that are producing good and bad compounds. So the same microbe can produce something or a metabolite that will be potentially beneficial or harmful. And you also have different microbes that can produce both beneficial and both harmful compounds. So, at Viome, we really try to get in there and figure out what is the activity of all of those microbes in your gut to really understand the whole picture that's working for you.
I'm glad to hear that because I think I'm low on the whole butyrate thing. And when you were talking about the bad things that happen from that butyrate not being able to process, I started to get worried. But okay, and apples are on my avoid list, but we'll get into that here soon. So basically, food produces. We eat food. Food produces energy. Like we all get that listening here. But if I understand this whole thing, what you guys do at Biome is you're analyzing how the food stuff we eat gets converted into molecular energy and then help to guide what that food stuff is either minimizing or maximizing our health performance, and again at that cellular level how to help live our best lives. Is that
exactly? No,
fair
you
to say?
nailed it.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
bunch of these metabolic pathways that are all kind of working in concert. Sometimes they work with each other, sometimes they work against each other, and it's about finding that balance and making sure you have the right energy that lets you perform at your best.
The orchestra of microbiome. That's we could make
Nice.
an analogy about that, something like that. Well, okay, so that's really good and really deep into the science. I'd say let's shake off a little bit for our listeners who maybe went cross-eyed there. I thought it was awesome, Sarah, man. I feel like I could keep on talking to you about bike racing and biochemistry for a while. But to you, Rob, can you tell our listeners what the Viome process looks like? So what I'm talking about is you go online, you order a thing. Like, what does that look like for people listening?
Yeah, so as complex as all of that science sounded that Sarah just regurgitated, the process could not be simpler. So it is legitimately
It's
as
true. That's true. It's very simple.
it's so you go to Viome.com, you purchase one of the tests, it arrives at your house with everything that you need to complete it. So basically two little sample collection tubes to collect some blood, to collect a little bit of stool, a little bit of poop, and then prepaid envelopes to mail them back. And all you do is you register the test so that we know whose it is. You fill out a questionnaire so we know um, a little bit of background information. And then from that point forward, everything becomes digital. And so you're operating within our app. And so when the results come back from the lab, hey, here's what we saw from an activity standpoint in your microbiome. Here's how we see that your immune cells and your mitochondrial cells are functioning. All of that information gets displayed in the app in a series of what we call scores, which are all explained here. This is what it means for your metabolic fitness, how well you break down sugars, and do you convert them to fats or do you burn them efficiently? Here's what we saw with your immune cells. Here's your biological age. And then from all that information, here are the foods that you should be eating and or avoiding that are considered quote unquote healthy. And so we break those down into 4 categories for you as well. So you basically get an entire encyclopedia of foods and how good or bad they are for you.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary, which has been my experience as well with that. And so those 4 food groups, I want to talk about those in a minute. And disclaimer for our listeners, I know that this is a little product forward, but you'll see where we're going with this because it kind of needs to be with where we're going with the whole performance side of things. So, Rob, could you describe what is like the definition of superfood versus the enjoy food, the minimize food, and then the avoid food?
Yeah, so I think people have this general sense that things like avocados or kale are healthy for everybody. And the reality is, it's highly dependent on your unique body. And so, all that stuff that Sarah just described about the complexity of these systems and the uniqueness from person to person is what drives whether a food is actually good for you or not. And so, yes, we have a superfood list. I think that term gets thrown around a lot. And when people look at their superfood lists, what they tend to notice is all of these foods look healthy. And that's not really a surprise. What people fail to realize, though, is that those foods are on their superfood list for very specific reasons related to them. And more often than not, a lot of those foods are going to be on other people's avoid or minimize lists. And Adam, you and I were talking about this earlier.
Yeah,
Apples are an avoid food for you. They are an enjoy food for me. You have watermelon as a superfood. I have it as an avoid. And what determines that is based on, is this going to spike my blood sugar more so than another type of carb? Is it going to feed a virus that I have? All of these types of things. And so it becomes a bit more clear when people look at their avoid list and see what are considered healthy foods on there that they would never have expected they should be avoiding, and that these foods actually could be detrimental to their health.
perfect, perfect. Okay, so when an athlete gets their results, okay, and they want to start improving their health, wellness, and performance, so they stop eating the avoid stuff for a while. And how long is a while? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm gonna drive you nuts here because almost all of my answers are gonna start with "it depends." Um,
Fair
and
enough.
the reason for that is the avoid foods are not going to be on there for a singular reason. They're going to be on there for many possible reasons. So, for instance, we look at your avoid foods, and I hope you don't mind if I go through some of your.
Let's do it. Let's dive into Coach AP and
All
the
right.
microbiome of that makes him up. Because clearly, it's just
So,
that.
so your foods can be on there for different reasons. So let's look at yours.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
some of your avoid foods: apples, bell peppers, cucumbers, melon, wheat bread, which this was the first I've seen on here for this particular reason,
Hmm.
tomatoes. Those are 6 foods on your avoid list because you have different viruses that are known to live on or subsist on those foods.
I
And
eat the hell out of tomatoes, salsa in particular. If anybody knows me, a lot of chips and salsa. FYI.
and that'll do it. And so at some point along the way, you contracted a virus that lives on a tomato. It's now hanging out in your gut, and if you continue to feed it, it can continue to have a negative impact in different ways of inflammation. And
That
so,
sucks. That sucks.
which is not great. Here's the
No,
silver lining. Um,
please, please.
because this is on here as a virus, or the reason that this is an avoid food is because of the virus. Avoiding that food for, let's say, 3 to 6 weeks is, in almost all cases, that virus is going to starve, get taken care of by the immune system. It's just not going to be there anymore. And so a lot of these foods can be added back in after the fact.
This happened with me, Adam, if it makes you feel better. I had tomato as an avoid and I reduced
Hmm.
it, and now it's off of my avoid list.
Oh my
So I'm
god!
back to
Thank
salsa as
you.
well.
Like you should have seen like the womp 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 thing going on over here because it was is pretty bad. So to hear that, that's really good. And I guess where my head is going, say as a coach, is okay. We test a thing, we see a thing, and it says don't do this or do this. So then if I go and do what I should, quote unquote should, for what was that, 3 to 6 weeks, Rob,
Yeah,
for
about three to
tomatoes?
six weeks in the case of a
Okay.
virus. Yeah.
In the case of a virus. Okay. So I stay tomato virus free for 3 to 6 weeks. Do I then like get another gut intelligence test and scoop my poop and send it back to you guys? Or what do you recommend there?
Yeah, I mean, we would say give it a good 4 months before you do a full retest, but I if
4 months.
if
Okay.
you're an absolute fiend about salsa and you were
Mm-hmm.
clean, let's say, for, you were tomato sober for 3 to 6 weeks, uh,
Tomato sober. I like it.
yeah, I think you could probably add those back in, more often than not. If you're like me, so Sarah had the experience where the virus went away. I've had brown rice viruses and blueberry viruses where I
Interesting.
stubbornly continued to eat those things, and on subsequent tests 4 months later, still had those viruses. So,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, so 3 to 6 weeks is typically it. One thing I do want to point out though is not
Yeah.
all of your foods on the avoid list are going to be due to this reason. So, for instance, you have spinach as an avoid food, which I
Okay.
think people would be hard pressed to think of as anything other than great for everybody.
Right.
Um, and the reality is, you have that on your avoid list because spinach contains a lot of purines, which hopefully I don't nerd out too much, but it contains a lot of purines which produce uric acid. And you're producing so much uric acid right now that adding more spinach to the mix is actually going to be detrimental to you. And
All right. So I'm gonna get some gout. That's good. Um, that sucks. But so okay. So I will admit that when I was, I think this is coming from my first test. So I was eating a crap ton of spinach when, like, leading into this, and then I saw that, and I pulled back on the whole spinach train. Like, there's no more spinach going in because I read that, and I was like, Adam doesn't want any of that in his life. So, Viome, thank you. You've helped pull back the spinach uric acid situation in my life.
yeah, and who knows? You responding like that may have calmed the system, and maybe
Hmm.
you'll be able to add that back in, hopefully, if you like spinach.
Yeah, no, I do. I love spinach, and I love all those. Well, cucumbers I don't really care about, so whatever. Um, so, but the rest of those, and you said wheat bread, is that right?
Wheat bread, which I would have expected, you
Huh.
had a couple avoid foods on here because they would be expected to spike your blood sugar in an unhealthy way. I thought that would be the reason, but apparently you have a wheat bread or sprouted wheat bread virus as well. Which
Oh, that's right. I
you
didn't
may have
remember that.
broken the record. I've done a lot of these reviews. I've never seen this many viruses.
So, okay, well, that's, God, this sucks. I'm gonna just lean into my like inner Sheryl Sandberg, Brene Brown here, and just lean into the vulnerability. So, all right, how do you get viruses? Is it from like not washing produce, or I mean, you can't wash sprouted wheat bread, so like, how do you pick these things up?
It can be a handful of different reasons, and part of it is too if you're eating at restaurants, which we're not doing a ton of these days.
Hmm.
But if the restaurant is using utensils for multiple different food types, viruses can kind of zip around the kitchen that way and end up in something. And you end up with one that maybe you're not having black pepper, and you end up with a black pepper virus. So that's one way. I definitely know that I got my blueberry virus because I was eating raw picked blueberries that I picked myself and just never washed.
So good though, so tasty.
So it's typically kind of the washing. It can be due to some other factors as well, though.
So, all right, all right, we're getting vulnerable here, Rob and Sarah. Because I'll say this too, which has been interesting, and for all the listeners, we're going to talk about poop and gas and all the things. Okay, so
Mhm.
first test. So after that, I read the whole spinach thing, and I was like, no way. But meanwhile, like Kristen, like she's eaten all the spinach, she's fine. But I will say that, excuse me, because I went off of tomatoes and spinach for a while after the first test, and to bring listeners up to speed, I've done two tests now. The first of which I did not adhere very well because I lasted like 5 days without salsa, and then I was like, and I just went back to it. So then I did my second test and whatever. But so to be open and frank here, what I was experiencing was like in the morning I would wake up and I had bloating. It wasn't like super severe, but it was like to the point where it's like, like I just want to go do my bathroom thing like right away, and it was uncomfortable and all this kind of stuff. And then it was like fine. And then you go about your day and like no real issues throughout the day, but it was always like the morning bloat, right?
Mhm.
And so, with that be coming from the tomato, spinach, cucumbers, avoid food situation, is that like the only thing?
It certainly could be. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's probably more so part of what's going on than necessarily
Hmm.
the entire thing. Because what's interesting about what you said is we haven't talked about this before, but we looked at your scores, and
Hmm.
that was all reflected in what we saw in the sample, or what the lab saw in the sample. I certainly don't look at it.
Mhm.
Um, so that's very interesting. But to answer your question, it is more likely the whole orchestra than necessarily
Mhm.
a couple of bad players. And I think that's difficult for people to wrap their minds around. Everybody wants to say, do I have candida, or do I have a particular parasite, or do I have, in
Mhm.
this case, a virus? And that alone is my problem. But is what Sarah pointed out earlier, is it's a highly complex system that works together in unison, and you need um, everybody pulling in the same direction.
The orchestra. Got
Yeah,
it.
and Adam, I would
Got
just point out that Viome aside, what you're
it.
doing
Mhm.
is really powerful in that you're actually pausing to observe how you're feeling. I went years with just ignoring, like, oh, I have a stomach ache. That's just normal. That's fine. And I wish I knew what I knew now. I mean, if no one,
Right.
even if you're not going to do a test like Viome, but you're just interested in feeling better or optimizing your performance, just start to take note of what happens after you eat certain foods. Like just doing that alone can have a big impact.
That's a really good point, and I am very like diet neutral, following diets or food choice. It's like whatever. What I love is when athletes, and my athletes in particular, bring more awareness to the food that they're putting into their mouth and how it makes them feel throughout the day, during training session, throughout the day, at night, all this kind of stuff. So the awareness is huge, and I think that the Biome product can help with that awareness for sure. So yeah, thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up. So the other thing, all right, so what I'm learning too is my self talk of salsa, right? 5 days, no salsa, salsa sober, if you will. Thank you, Rob, for trademarking that. And then I was like, no, I'm back on the salsa bandwagon. So, and then I was going doing all the things. But then recently, after this next test, I said, I drew the line in the sand. I'm like, you know what? For science, I'm going to not do salsa. And but not only for science, but because of the self-talk of, if there's a substance or a thing or even an activity or something that you can't give up for 3 to 6 weeks, that challenged me in
Mhm.
my self-talk in terms of, huh? Do I really need salsa in my life? And my wife's probably going to listen to this and she's like, oh my god, he's having a religious moment. But you, what I'm saying is, for those who say they do this test and there are love foods on your avoid list, do some like awareness and reflection on, why do you need that, in your life, and what is the cost benefit of getting rid of it for the greater outcome, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we're talking mostly to athletes today, right? And as athletes,
Mm-hmm.
we love a good challenge. So why not take that as any kind of challenge? And you said it, for science. I just always encourage people to be their own scientists and do an experiment and try something, see how you feel before and after. You never know how it's going to make you feel, and you might actually decide you don't like that thing you thought you loved. For me, I used to eat popcorn every single day, no joke.
Oh,
Um,
really?
and I just, accepted the gut bloat. I thought that was just normal. And then I realized
Mm-hmm.
I finally put two and two together. And now I still have it every once in a while because I love it, but I don't need to have it because I know that I
Interesting.
don't really get along with it so great.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, so let's zoom back out, because there's more than just feelings and rainbows and stuff like that going on. You guys actually measure stuff.
Mhm.
And Sarah, I'll go back to you. The client, they go to Biome, they get 7 scores dumped into their app, and that is. Do you want to walk through those 7 scores, starting with the inflammatory activity and onward, and just kind of briefly describe what each of those mean?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we have these 7 scores that make up an overall gut microbial health score. So, first you have the inflammatory activity. So, this just measures the activity or expression of all those microbial genes that can contribute in some capacity to inflammation, whether that's in your gut or contribute towards some distal sites. I don't think I mentioned this, but it's kind of amazing that 70% of your immune cells live in your gut. So there's a lot of immune
Wow,
activity that can
did
take
not know
place
that.
there. Yeah, it's kind of incredible. And so, in when things are in homeostasis, like we talked about, and you have a healthy, robust immune response, this isn't really a big deal. You eat foods, you maybe ingest some small environmental toxins, but your body responds quickly. But if your microbes are now in an environment where they perceive something that's possibly threatening, they could respond by producing some sort of metabolite that, will ultimately hopefully protect them, but it might have a negative effect on, your health. And so a poor score here would indicate that you have a pro-inflammatory environment. So we would tailor food recommendations to include nutrients that might activate more anti-inflammatory pathways and or calm down some of those pro-inflammatory functions. Okay, and so then next we have your metabolic fitness, which Rob touched on. This is looking at signatures in the microbes that are associated with blood sugar regulation, insulin resistance, weight control. An example would be going back to that butyrate metabolite we talked about. And so while that's a really good metabolite for energy production, it can also help with insulin sensitivity. So if you had a good butyrate pathway score, that would potentially boost your metabolic fitness score.
Nice.
Then digestive efficiency. So this looks at quite a few, at least 12, I believe, different pathways and all the activities of the microbes that contribute to those pathways. And it's looking at the overall function of your GI tract and how well your microbes can actually digest your food. So just a really quick example, there's a pretty well-known metabolite called TMA or trimethylamine. And so this metabolite is produced from some of your microbes, usually after eating a food heavy in choline, like some meat products. And so this metabolite can get further converted into another metabolite called TMAO, which has linked unfavorably to some cardiovascular effects. And so you want to have a low TMA score. I eat a lot of meat and my score is really low. So it doesn't mean you can't eat meat. Everything again depends on your context, right? So there's a
It's
lot of
the orchestra. It's the orchestra.
exactly. It's part of the
Yeah.
orchestra. So then we have gut lining health. And this is a really cool one. It looks at your overall health and integrity of the intestinal barrier, including this protective mucosal layer. So your large intestine has a big layer of mucus. It helps prevent pathogens and their toxins from getting into your bloodstream. So we want that. But in a pro-inflammatory environment, you can get cracks in this in your intestine, and it can lead to more permeability or what we sometimes call leaky gut. And when that happens, toxins like endotoxins, like bacterial lipopolysaccharide, which is found on the membranes of some bacteria, those can get into the bloodstream or some other potential environmental compounds or even the bacteria themselves. And those can cause inflammation effects throughout your body. So you really want a strong gut lining. And so we look at activity of some pathways that contribute to the overall health of your gut lining and give you a score based on that. Protein fermentation, that's an interesting one for athletes. So basically looking at how well you are digesting protein. And so, I don't want to generalize too much, but we eat quite a bit of protein as athletes. At least I do, to repair our muscles and help our muscles grow. But if you aren't digesting your protein fully, like if you don't chew your food a lot or you just your own digestive system isn't working at full capacity, well, your microbes will take over and digest that protein for you. And some of the, metabolites and byproducts of the bacterial protein metabolism can be a bit harmful and lead to some pro-inflammatory effects. So we're looking at, your overall ability to digest and metabolize protein with that score. And
Yeah.
then,
So,
go ahead,
Sarah,
Bob.
can I add one thing there? So one of the things, Adam, that we notice anecdotally is that if you were to talk to our chief translational science officer, she'd tell you athletes, people in the paleo community, people who are doing the one meal a day, big steak type of eating,
Mm-hmm.
their protein fermentation scores typically don't look great because, to Sarah's point, all that excess protein, you're overwhelming the system all at once with too much protein, and the excess literally just sits around and ferments like a rotting pumpkin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for anybody, for anybody for anybody in the bodybuilding community who's tried to drink their weight in protein on a daily basis, those terrible farts that they get, all that excess methane, is a
Yep.
clear sign of protein fermentation.
Yep. Yep. And which is why we give, protein recommendations per, sitting or serving to athletes to space it out throughout the day. So this
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense because you
yeah,
can only use so much, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So then there's a couple more. So we have a gas production score. This is exactly what it sounds like. Microbes produce gas. We inherently know this. So we look at the overall activity of the gas production by those microbes. And of course, if you have a lot of gas production, you're not going to feel great. It's associated with different digestive difficulties and discomfort, and potentially some inflammation of the gut. So in particular, we look at some methane and sulfide gas production pathways, and give you a score based on how active those microbes are with those pathways. And then the last one is active microbial diversity. So just briefly, in the microbiome field, we've looked at as a measure of gut health, we've often looked at the total number of species of microbes in your gut as a readout for how healthy your microbiome is. We do it a little differently at Viome, like I mentioned earlier. We don't care so much about the exact number of microbes you have, but how many of them are active. And so how many active microbes you have, because if they're active, that means they're doing something, right? So we're more interested in what your microbes are doing. And so in general, if you have more active microbes, that's going to be associated with a greater overall gut health. This gives you redundancy and resiliency in the face of some potential harmful elements that may be present in your gut. So if you have a low score, it's because you don't have a very diverse active microbial population. And if you do want to nerd out on this score, you get actually a whole list of all the active microbes. So you can just go look at that list and start going into Wikipedia and learning about the microbes that are actually active in your stool. So it's kind of cool.
And
I'm definitely going to do that. Rob, I've got a question for you, but I think you had something there.
I was just going to point out, because I love anytime I can hand out a gold star. For you in particular,
Ooh.
you have a high diversity of microbial richness, meaning you have a not only just a large number of microbes in general, you also have a large number of beneficial microbes, and you are producing a ton of butyrate. So,
Great
hats
job.
off, my
Yes,
friend.
I love it. I love the gold stars. I'm actually I've accessed my information here, and I am looking at metabolic fitness, and it looks like I'm crushing that as well. I
You
think
Nice.
are.
Nice.
nice. What does that? What does that mean?
Uh,
I mean, you just went over it, Sarah, but like specifically, like, would you change? Can you? I've got 83. I think that's up to 100. Is it
Oh,
beneficial
wow.
to go up to 100, or like what does that? What does that mean for
it,
an
it
old coach like this?
83 is very good. And what does metabolic fitness really mean? It means that you break down sugars and certain starches better than others. And so when we look at your superfoods and we see, watermelon in there, which has a
Mm-hmm.
huge sugar content, and that's a superfood for you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the proof is in the pudding on what that really means. You handle sugars very well.
So, okay, so a couple questions here as we just go down the rabbit hole of Coach AP's microbiome. First of all, I've been eating just a crap ton of watermelon lately, and I just get excited to. I mean, it's cold, it's hot here, right? So it's cold and sugary and refreshing and delicious. So there's all those things. But is there any part of my microbiome that tastes watermelon like in my mouth and just gets excited and was like, more of that? Or how does the orchestra react to a superfood? Does it get excited?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything. You're gonna possibly be selecting for whatever microbes are gonna, be active when they see the compounds or the nutrients in the watermelon, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it could be many different species of microbes, but yeah, whatever components. There's multiple nutrients in the watermelon, but probably the fibers, for example, or the sugars, you are definitely selecting for microbes that are very active, and we're seeing that activity in your results. So there are other small signals that the bacteria may be responding to, but the nutrients in those foods make it down to the large intestine, where you have bacteria that are just ready to go when they see those components of the watermelon.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and actually, Adam, the minute that you start chomping on some watermelon,
Mm-hmm.
your body starts sending signals down to the digestive tract to prepare the microbes that specific food is coming. And there's this additional connection between the microbiome and the brain, this gut-brain connection that then is
Mm-hmm.
sending signals up to your brain. So to your point, the whole orchestra starts to play as soon as you start chomping on some watermelon.
So It's interesting. More anecdotal evidence here. Like sauerkraut and trout are on my superfoods list, and I mean, growing up in northern Minnesota, I had a fair amount of sauerkraut in my life, but not recently. So I started aiming for those two things, and every time I do, sometimes even together, which is a delicious meal for anyone wanting to try something different. Um, I just like light up. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So these superfoods, you might be eating them already, or you might not, and it could introduce something that could not only help your performance, but also just liven up your palate a little bit. Um, Question, Rob, just and maybe this is the last thing on my microbiome, but it's interesting to me because Sara just went through the list, and I look at my metabolic fitness is through the chart, but my digestive efficiency is like scraping the bottom of the barrel. How does that work when I'm like metabolic fitness? Yeah, but then I'm not that efficient. What the heck's going on?
That is simply the rate and efficiency with which food passes through the digestive tract. And so that can be host or a reflection of a number of different other scores. So for instance, you producing a lot of uric acid, Sara mentioned TMA, trimethylamine earlier. You're producing a lot of that. I don't know if you're eating a lot of eggs or what. Um, and
No, no.
interesting. Your oxidative score was not great. The gas that you mentioned all showed up in the scores, and so
Gas production is 83, folks. This is not good.
not good. You want
You
that,
beat me.
that was like golf. You
Oh
want the
god.
low score.
Digestive efficiency is 16, Sara. Does this mean I'm
Oh.
what is it? Oh god. We're gonna have to take this offline.
But there are a
Uh,
lot of scores that go into the digestive efficiency. So you just have a
Yeah,
little bit of an imbalance,
orchestra,
but
orchestra.
exactly. And so you've already started to, add in these additional superfoods. So again, the microbiome, it's dynamic. You once you make these changes, you're gonna just reshuffle that orchestra completely. And so it will be interesting to see what it looks like in a few months from now.
and
Perfect.
Adam, if it makes you feel better,
Yeah,
metabolic fitness,
please.
butyrate, diversity, inflammation, all of these scores you knocked out of the park. So,
Sounds pretty good to
I
me.
wouldn't worry too much about that one guy.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. That does make me feel so much better about myself. And I'm just gonna stick to sauerkraut and trout and watermelon for the rest of my life. So, um, well, you two, we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I kind of want to summarize and wrap up. But before we do, I've got a few questions for each of you. And these questions are kind of like summary questions and also kind of curiosity questions for our listeners. And because everybody that tunes into this is just they're addicted to that performance. They want to know more. They want to learn more. And some of them may take the advice from this podcast and go and do the product thing and all this kind of stuff, and some may not. So um, let's jump into these questions and see what you guys have to say. Question one is for Sara.
Mhm.
Is anyone's microbiome the same? Meaning, like, if you're living in the same house, family of four or whatever, are they the same, or is it different even between siblings? And then, does the microbiome change over time?
Yeah. Okay. So your first question, no, no one has the exact same microbiome as anyone else. And if they did, I would love to see that data. There's just so much nuance. There's so many factors. We're talking about trillions of these microbes, right? And your environment, everything from your environment and your genetics, your whole context plays a huge role in what's shaping your microbiome. And to kind of transition to the second part of your question, the cool thing about the microbiome is that it's dynamic. And so, changing your diet or changing, your sleep patterns, or if you, unfortunately had to take a dose of antibiotics, all of those kinds of things are going to affect that microbiome. And so, it's cool that it's dynamic. It means you can change it. It means that if you are having problems, it's not the end of the world. You can lead, get yourself on a path to better digestive health.
That is good to be able to change it if it is bad. And as Rob told me just before this, getting a dog changes your microbiome.
Yeah.
Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk? Question two for Rob. If someone is listening to this podcast and they're uncomfortable scooping their poop, or they're uncomfortable just sharing their information, I guess. What knowledge could you share with them to improve their microbiome, generally speaking, without this individualized approach that Biome offers?
Yeah, I think certainly. Um, Again, it depends. I'm going to preface it with that, but
Of
generally,
course it
I think
does.
uh, as a culture, we could benefit from more fiber in our diet. The microbes that are in our digestive tract, they live off of fiber, and most of us just don't eat enough. So mixing in more leafy greens, mixing in more different types of vegetables and resistant starches like sweet potatoes and things like that is generally a good place to start. But again, the devil's in the details. I've seen plenty of people have all kinds of problems with cauliflower and different types of starches. I would caution people a little bit. The other thing I would give is just on the protein side. We talked about it a little bit. I think as athletes, we tend to overdo it on the protein side, and that can, more is not always better. There are some detriments to overdoing it on the protein side.
I would
Gotcha.
just add
Gotcha.
to that, if you don't have the means to do some of these tests or some of the other biohack tools that are available to you, but just do what we discussed earlier. Just be a scientist and take notes. Think of a question and try to answer it with some key observations. How do I feel after I eat this watermelon? Like, I mean, Adam, it works great for Adam. Does it really work great for me? And just start to kind
I'm
of
flying high in watermelon right now.
yeah, right.
It's
And
great.
so just being really in tune with what's going on in your body can be really powerful.
Cool. Cool. Okay, so the final question goes to you both. And since I shared some of my information for each of you, what's like one cool thing that you learned from your biome test results?
Should I go first, Rob, or do you want to go?
Lead off, all you.
Okay. I was pretty low on probiotic foods. So I had a
Oh, really?
lot of foods in my superfoods that were like kimchi and sauerkraut. And I just thought I was I looked through and I realized, yeah, I really haven't been incorporating those into my diet much at all. And but I also found that a lot of my superfoods were things I eat a ton of, which is, my three go-tos are avocado, eggs, and kale. So that was really
Mhm.
exciting. I felt like a little bit validated there. And then on my avoids, I also had some of those viruses, so tomato and pepper, which was kind of interesting. But like I said, I was able to get the tomato off of my avoid list. So yeah,
I'm working on it, Sarah. Tomato sober. Here we come.
you got it.
Rob, what was interesting when you scooped your poop?
Oh God. So I always considered myself to be very healthy and eat pretty clean. And for a
Mhm.
long time, I was on more of the traditional bodybuilder diet of white rice, steamed broccoli, grilled chicken.
Mhm.
And I got and I avoided starchy carbs like potatoes, like the plague. And when I got my results, it basically said, you need to avoid white rice at all costs, and you need to eat a ton of potatoes. Um,
Whoa.
Interesting.
I probably should have guessed that. I am Irish, but making making that change over the course of like 4 weeks, my energy levels dramatically changed. I had sustained energy through the day. My percent body fat went from 14 to 10, changing nothing else. And I was eating significantly more carbs just generally, switching from mostly white rice and things like that to potatoes. So that was like opened my eyes to this whole thing.
That was the biggest thing for me too. It was the energy levels. I do keep a lot of track of my sleep and try to do different things to optimize that. So I don't think that was a real factor. I already had that pretty dialed in, but just my energy levels through the day have dramatically improved in the last few months since I've made those changes.
Yeah, same here.
That's that's super cool. That's super cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that that it's helped you guys too. I look forward to getting my energy levels up and gas production. I guess even did so. Um, but no, this has been awesome. This has been an awesome conversation, you guys. For our listeners who find you as interesting as I do, can they find you on the socials?
I'm not as active as I once was, but I'm on Instagram at Sara W Birdie, SarawBirdie, which is my nickname.
Cool. And Rob, are you a social media guy and hanging out on one platform versus the other, or are you a TikTok guy or something?
Oh man, maybe I should become a TikTok guy.
You would be great at TikTok.
10% body fat, chomping away on Irish potatoes. You better do something with that.
I know. I think there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am a bit of an embarrassment to my generation when it comes to social. I am on Instagram. I believe it's Rob Pellow.
Mm-hmm.
That is the extent.
Got it. Keeping it simple. I like it. So for those listening that are interested in Viome, you can go to at myviome on Instagram, at Viome on Twitter and Facebook. Give them a follow. And for the listeners who want to give this a shout, you can go to bio.com and use Trainwright for an additional discount on either service that Rob talked about earlier. So, you guys, thank you again so much for spending about an hour with us on the Trainwright podcast. Really enjoyed the conversation and looking forward to having athletes put this in place and increase their performance.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for having us, Adam.